I'm Joe Halco, Director of Community Relations for Northwestern Counseling and Support Services, and welcome to another episode of NCSS Here for You. Since 1958, Northwestern Counseling and Support Services has been providing access to high-quality services which promote healthy living and emotional well-being to the residents of Franklin and Grand Isle counties. Over the years, as the needs of the community have changed, so too have the programs and services that we make available to assist children, adolescents, adults, families, and seniors. We take our role in the community seriously and strive to provide a continuum of the highest quality services to meet the needs of individuals who at any point seek assistance. Today, I'll be talking with Tom Murphy, who's the founder of Sweethearts and Heroes, a student empowerment and empathy activation program. He's also a valued community partner, an entrepreneur, a former UFC competitor, and now he's added author. It's never been more difficult to be a young person or an educator than it is today. And the pandemic has only exacerbated the situation, which for many has resulted in a feeling of hopelessness. To discuss the current state of our youth and the mindset of teachers and how the HOPE model, which stands for Hold On, Possibilities Exist, provides strategies to deal with these challenges, I'm pleased to introduce this month's guest, Tom Murphy. Tom, welcome to the program. It's great to have you here.
Well, Joe, I'm honored, and I love the name of the program, Here for You. It just talks about the present, being in the present with other people.
Yeah, well, thank you. And, critically important to human services is that organizations do have to be here and here for all of their citizens, no matter who they are, how vulnerable they may be.
Yeah.
So, thank you very much, though, for that being our show and tagline as an organization as well. So as I was saying in the intro there, it truly has never been a more difficult time to navigate society as a young person, and certainly all of those who have dedicated their lives to being educators than it has today. And especially, we talk about the last 21 months, 22, we're going on 22 months now of this pandemic, which has just made matters even more difficult for many. And certainly, there's always been individuals who have had that feeling of hopelessness. But that now has grown, I think, exponentially since the beginning of the pandemic. So what have you seen in these behavioral changes in your travels?
Well, Joe, I think the first thing that needs to be stated is this is not a new problem to the pandemic. Mm-hmm. I think that, as you just said, it maybe will exponentially change this feeling of hopelessness and the destructive decisions that our young people engage in. And, since 2007, probably the worst of the destructive decisions, suicide in our young people, has really tripled in middle schoolers, in 10 to 14-year-olds. Yeah. And, if you really just silently contemplate that, and you think that this is never before seen in human history, that our young people are showing us just how hopeless they truly are. And as I said, maybe that's the worst of the destructive decisions, but there's so many more that are just drastically on the rise when it comes to getting into relationships that maybe they shouldn't be in, substance abuse, just so many other things. And then, we could also make an argument that perhaps maybe even homicide, that we seem to be seeing more and more in our young people, is on the rise, which is pretty darn scary. Yeah. So it's something that I don't believe we've talked enough about. These are a lot of taboo subjects. They're very difficult and challenging to talk about. A good friend of mine, and I'm sure we'll get into it in this book, has given me some real guidance over the years. His name is Tim McGowan, and Tim inherited a district his first couple years in counseling where they had 15 suicides in 30 months, which is almost hard to even contemplate. Yeah. And then 2 years later, they had one. And, if Tim were sitting here with us and you said, Tim, what's the secret of going from 15 to 1 in 24 months? He would just say one word. It's about having conversations. And, That's why I value the time that we have here together, because young people, they don't always need to be engaged or express these things. It helps, but they need to hear it. And they need to know that the adults and the trusted people in their life and the people around them are having these conversations, because it helps.
Tom, you mentioned something, and I'm going to go off script here a little bit because I think it's important, and that is when you gave the time frame of like 2007, 2008, that, by the way, is also the time of the introduction of the smartphone. And, we have talked at NCSS a lot about the fact that when you think of what young people have in their hand as far as information that's available at a couple of clicks on a phone, and then you start to think through how the brain develops and where are they in that progression at those certain ages. A lot of times, you begin to say there's so much available to them that they can't process the way you and I would. And you begin to see, I guess what I'm saying, is a lot of where people feel their self-worth isn't quite as good. Their imagery, they don't look like so-and-so who they've seen, on Instagram or whatever the case may be. But part and parcel, but you're so right, is that the other thing that's happened is that, if you want to call it talking to, the talk is not really verbal. It's what's being punched into and viewed and accessed through technology, as opposed to what you and I are doing right now, which is the one-on-one conversation where we can really get a sense for how passionate you are about a certain subject, or you know what I mean? You see a word or you see a sentence when we're talking, and you can really gain how do they really feel about that. When you type something that's a sentence or what have you, you may get the wrong impression of what the person really means. So anyway, I'm going a little off of what I had intended to here, but I think that's part of everything that we're going to talk about as far as what young people are exposed to.
Yeah, wow, what a huge topic. I probably had 30 things go through my mind as you were talking about this half-grown brain that we seem to sometimes forget that you and I are sitting here. Well, you have a fully grown brain.
Well, I don't know about that.
Mine's still in the works. But, we put this device in a student's hand. I have a friend of mine, his name is Tom Kirsting, and he wrote a book called Disconnected, wonderful book. And, this will sound a little graphic when I say it, but I get this question all the time, and I kind of lifted it from him because, he gave me this piece of wisdom. And he said, parents will always say, when's the right time to get my son or daughter a smartphone?
Yeah.
And his answer, and this is going to seem a little graphic, so a little trigger alert here. He said, when you're ready for them to watch hardcore pornography, put a phone in their hand. And, when you think that we're putting that in a child's hand that's in single digits, that's what's going to happen. Now, that just states something graphic. But the truth is, I don't even know if that's the worst part of it. When you talk about the way that phones are designed for the dopaminergic response for them to have on the human brain, our brain has never, ever had a response like this in all of human history the way it does with a smartphone. Yeah. And something else that you said that's just vitally important, that we don't realize that things like empathy have been nearly cut in half in the last 30 years. And we have a little seminar series that we do on empathy activation and what we call our empathy killers and our empathy activators. And I think one of the greatest things that kills empathy is less personal connection. And we say largely due to technology. And sometimes people think it's because they're learning to communicate only through text. Maybe. For me, it's really that this computer between the 6 inches between your ears that controls the 6 feet below it does 10 quadrillion things per second. And what that means is when you and I just saw the way you swallowed, right? You're thinking about saying something. You're nodding your head. Your fingers are folded. Like, I'm becoming very mindful or conscious to these things. You don't have to. The brain over millions of years has developed so that I watch everything that you do and I don't realize that I'm doing it. And when we put that in a child's hand and they spend half of their time not looking at a human face anymore, the brain was designed for that. And we've just stripped them of that. So I like to really point that out to parents especially, because sometimes they think it's only the content. And one of my favorite authors is a guy named John Medina, wrote a wonderful book called Brain Rules, the 12 Brain Rules for Learning. He also wrote one called Attack of the Teenage Brain. Very easy read, fun read for parents, even for students, to understand how their brain is really working. He'll say that actually a student's social media can actually increase both cognitive and affective empathy. And sometimes parents or teachers will frown at you and say, well, what do you mean? I thought you said, well, if you think about it this way, and I'm not down on the kids' technology. It's part of their wiring upstairs. But you know, and I know, that 30 years ago and before, like all of human history, sometimes young people felt like I'm the only one that feels this way. Or they couldn't express themselves. Maybe when you were a kid, you couldn't express yourself. And now, a kid can look at his social media and say, oh my gosh, I'm not the only one that feels this way? Oh my gosh, I'm not alone? So it is a fine balance to walk with technology and this developing brain. And I just think that that's part of the conversation that we need to have.
Yeah, you're so right. It's that age-old scenario of we have come so far through the use of technology. Incredible leaps and bounds of information that we're able to access and utilize in a very positive way. For all of that, though, as we know, like with anything in life, there's the downside of, like the gentleman said to you, to the parents about at what age are you ready for your son or daughter to view pornography on a screen on their phone? So you're right, it always is a balance. The thing that's rather fascinating is two things. Number one, like you were saying, is they're not talking to one another in a social setting. And this also, by the way, leads into other things. Like even though you have the world at your disposal and in your hand, you can still feel so isolated from that world. So, that could take you down a path where, when you were saying earlier about individuals and suicidal thoughts and that whole path, is that for as great as technology can be, it also has a bit of a downside, and it really gets back to the individual, their surroundings, the support systems, everything that's involved, and quite frankly, human contact.
Sometimes, Joe, people call those soft skills that we just develop naturally. I years ago, I started calling them human skills. And they're things that we learn just from being in contact and proximity of other humans that we just naturally pick up, that mammals do. They watch, they model behavior, they watch the way you shake your head, and you don't even realize where you develop some of these things. And we just have a generation of young people. And what I also thought interesting, and I've never really heard many people say this, but I've said this to a lot of teachers, what happened in 2007? The iPhone came out. And we wonder why suicides have tripled since 2007. And I certainly wouldn't blame the iPhone.
No,
but a dramatic trend took place beginning in 2007.
And again, because before that, yes, people had cell phones and what have you, and they talked on all that. But that's a point in time, though, where all of a sudden you've got something that is more powerful than the old, huge IBM computer that used to sit in organizations' basements and a cooling, in your hand. And we could talk about that all week long.
That's the truth.
So, Tom, it's been 10 or more years since you started Sweethearts and Heroes. And what is it that caused you to structure that program in the first place?
Joe, I get this from kids all the time, and my best questions come from students. I just came from the school. I just stopped right now to do this with you, but I was on my way home from being at a school all day, and some of the best questions I get are from students, and they ask me this all the time, and I get to reflect on it. And there's a couple things. I didn't realize when Sweethearts and Heroes actually began. In my mind, it began about 15 years ago when I started talking to young people, got to participate in some professional sports. And when I was doing that, I had a lot of people that knew me growing up and from college and said, hey, can you come and talk to my sports teams? They watched you on TV. And I'm like, yeah. And I would give them lessons that I got from different bosses that I've had. I've always been able to take really good lessons from coaches and business and sports and kind of put them together and give them to young people in kind of a fun way. And that's the easy answer. But, as I've been out on the road, even very early on, and I heard really difficult stories of young people. I have 4 kids, and I can't imagine them going through what I hear young people go through today. I mean, I could tell you 3 stories today of young people that I just spoke to today that I couldn't imagine my own children having to deal with the existence that they have. So as I've thought about that over the years, and I've used my own children as fuel, one of the things in one of the ethoses of what we do and push, it's a student empowerment message. And one of the things that we say, one of the phrases that we use a lot is called jumping into action, because that's what heroes do, right? They own the moment. They don't wait. They jump into action when they see someone in need. And as I kind of tied those 2 things together, and I was telling young people very early on, just 20 or 30 times a year, that you're the one that's got to jump into action in this war that we're in against hopelessness. You all, like adults, we're supposed to, but the fact is when someone's treated the wrong way, 96 to 97% of the time, it's never seen or addressed by adults. But every kid can tell you where it happens, when it happens, why it happens, and who it happens to. And that behavior's never really addressed. Our students are on the front line when it comes to this war on hopelessness, and that was always our message, was you have to be able to jump into action and help people. And then we give them strategies. Because I like to say life is not a talent contest, it's a strategy game. And that's one thing that's made us very popular across the country is we give real strategies. It's not just awareness. But as I've reflected on some of that superficial meaning, and there's real deep meaning in all of that, but I didn't realize that when I was a kid, my parents, and I only started talking about this a couple years ago, my parents ran a mission home, and we never had a lot of money, but we always had people living with us. And these were people that were truly hopeless, that didn't have any reason to hold on. There were no possibilities for to exist. And, my brothers and sisters growing up were hopeless. I was in and out of prison visiting them growing up as a kid. And, my brother Bobby Cummings fell out of a tree and broke his neck and died robbing a house. That was his existence. And he was a wonderful artist. He had amazing superpowers. He was my mom's favorite. And he just couldn't escape it. So as I had all these people living with us over the years, and then I became a teenager and I went to college and wrestled and had an amazing life and all this. It's just funny how it came full circle. And now I find myself talking to kids in the modern day, the same people that shared our dinner table. So that's kind of the progression of it.
Yeah. And when you were 8, I understand that rather interesting circumstance occurred, speaking of individials that are, vulnerable or in need. Would you like to share?
Yeah, it's funny. I like I said, I just started talking about these things. And when you're a kid and you have homeless people living with you, you don't go to school and tell people that. You don't say, Greg, he lived in an abandoned house and, baby Luke's mom, Karen, parents were in Minnesota or something and they threw her out because she got pregnant, with a baby inside of her. Like, what does she do? You don't go to school and tell your friends about that. But, they were my family. And I don't know, when I look back, my parents are still alive, they're starting to get older, and I don't know how they did it. Like, number one, it probably wasn't real safe for their 3 biological children, but they did it. And we never, I don't have any animosity. And the story you're referring to is, at one point, my parents gave my bedroom away, their only biological son's bedroom away. And we had a 3rd floor, and there was a bathroom in it. And my mom said, and dad said, well, that'll be your bathroom. That'll be your bedroom. The bathroom. And the only logical place to put your bed was in the tub as a kid. So you grab your blanket and your pillow and you just sleep in the tub. And you tell that to adults and they're like, oh my God, that's terrible. Well, not as a 8 or 9-year-old. Like, it's pretty awesome to go jump in the tub with your blanket and your pillow, and it was fun. But that was my bedroom for a whole year because someone needed that room more than I did. As a kid.
That is a fascinating story, and one that I think many people can't relate to. They need to sit back and really think about that for a moment. But when you think about what your parents were doing for people and realizing that their family would have to make some adjustments and what have you to help others, is pretty amazing.
Yeah, and it was really, so many thoughts just came rushing back to me, and this was outside of any foster system or programs like that Northwest Counseling would provide and link people. This was just my parents that were connected to maybe different church groups, and we know this guy, he's in need, this woman, and just dozens of people came through our house, and I saw some taken out in handcuffs, and talk about trauma. But I don't know. I mean, my life was always awesome, even though we didn't have a lot of money. I mean, I got into the sport of wrestling because all you needed was a pair of shorts and a T-shirt. So you didn't have to have very much to wrestle. But my life was still awesome because I had two parents that cared about us, but I think more importantly, modeled how to care about other humans.
That's terrific. Terrific. So now, Tom, you've co-authored a novel. A novel for teachers and students titled 13, here we go, right here, 13 Pillows for Affective Teachers. And this is a compilation of the themes and action steps that are included, as I understand it, in your Sweethearts and Heroes anti-bullying curriculum. So, tell us how this will serve as a resource, not only for educators and students, but really for everyday people, no matter what their walk of life is.
Makes you ready for anything. Well, number one, I'd say if you like Netflix, you'll love the book. It's a fictional allegory. It's a novel. It was written in honor of a young man. His first name was Evan, and in the book, his name is Alan. And without giving anything away in terms of the story, because there's some real neat twists and turns. In the 11th grade, Evan, in the book Alan, takes his own life. He was a wrestler. I personally have been in that wrestling room with him several times. Couldn't have picked the kid out of a lineup. He was just one of those invisible kids. I don't think he was bullied. I don't think he was mistreated. But I know he was hopeless because, as my speaking partner Rick Yarish taught me, that got blown up in Iraq, hopeless people do crazy things. And he didn't feel like he could hold on. He didn't feel like there were possibilities for his existence, so he gave up. And the protagonist in the book is a guy named Bruce Breyer. He's a young phys ed teacher. And when he loses, he got into the sport of physical education to turn boys into men and men into champions. The same thing that was done to him. And when he loses this young man, he decides that this isn't for him. And he writes his resignation in the prologue. He comes into the gym real early, reads it out loud, and from the shadows steps a custodian. And it's my friend Tim. And he knows the secret. Have a conversation. And Bruce just isn't ready for it. But he starts the ball rolling. He's a retired inner city teacher. A real funny, quick story. I have a group in Western New York reading this book, 93 students in one grade level. And teacher called me 3 days ago. What's today? 3 or 4 days ago, she called me at the end of last week, and she said, I got to tell you this. A young man who's reading the book has never, 8th or 9th grader, never spoken to a teacher in the school. Never. And she said, he came up to me because he wanted to talk about the book. And he said, I picture Tim as Morgan Freeman. And I've never told anyone that, but as we wrote it, that's the person that was in my head.
Really?
Is this guy Tim. So imagine Morgan Freeman stepping from the shadows and having a conversation with a young 25-year-old phys ed teacher. And but anyway, The other thing I should really mention, it says pillows instead of pillars.
Yes, yes.
And that's for a specific reason. You can figure that out if you read it. There's always these pillars of, of education and pillars of business. We changed it to pillows for a specific reason. But I think one of the things really to point out is this affective, and the E for effective has been crossed out.
Yes.
And people
Yes.
say, well, what do you mean by that?
Uh-huh.
Well, in the state of New York, every teacher is assessed based on their effectiveness. It's an assessment called APPR, and every teacher in New York State, you're either effective, ineffective, highly effective, or developing.
Mm-hmm.
I have never, as I've crisscrossed this nation from Hawaii to Houston to Montreal, and I've met tens of thousands of educators, the greatest educators, it has nothing to do with their effectiveness. There was an educator named Benjamin Bloom that said there's 3 domains of learning: the cognitive domain, the psychomotor that interacts with the world. Mm-hmm. And he said in order to connect the two, the head to the hands, you have to go through the heart, or the affective domain. And mm-hmm. every teacher that I've met that truly teaches or educates from the heart, every one of them, share these 13 common traits when it comes to dealing with young people or their colleagues. And that's why we call it the 13 pillows of highly affective educators, because Tim just lays out these 13 things if you truly want to affect young people in a positive way.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating, and I haven't had a chance to read it all, but I have read some of it, and it is very well done, by the way.
Appreciate it.
Very well done. Tom, I know we're getting short on time, but I've got to ask you, and you mentioned that you've been from New England, Hawaii, and all points in between, and have spoken to over 2 million students. Let's talk locally.
Yeah.
Your experiences here in Franklin County, and right now, as we sit, how school districts might be able to utilize this program.
Well, Joe, I've never peddled this message on anyone. I'm here if people need us. This community is very important to me. It's raised my 4 children. They're all old and grown. One's in the Marine Corps, one's in the Air Force, works at our base here. One runs the restaurant down the street, and Thomas is 17. And, for me, the greatest contribution I can give to the young people of this community has always been the restaurant. The doors are always open. Mm-hmm. We've had literally a couple of hundred young people over the last 10 years that have come in. Sometimes it's their first job, it's their first little nugget of meaning or significance, makes them feel very important and special. Those are the young people that I'm very blessed to have a chance to work with locally. So I love that. That's one of the highlights of my life, is working with those young people. I could name 10 of them right now. It's probably not appropriate, but they make me smile because they've changed my life, because I wish I had this kind of mindset when my own children were younger. Yeah. But I really believe that the young people that have come to work at the restaurant have really helped me grow as a father and as an employer. But in terms of locally, we've done a bunch of stuff in Vermont. I don't think we've done a tremendous amount in Franklin County, which is very sad to me. But I think a very wise person once said, it's hard to be a prophet in your own land. And I'm certainly the furthest thing from a prophet. People see a guy with painted fingernails and a free hug shirt on every day, and they're like, I'm not sure if I want that guy in my talking to my kids. I'm like a circus trick, I guess.
You are so right, though, about how often people are, their professional life takes them outside of the area where they live, where people go, oh my gosh, we're going to have Tom here from Franklin County, Vermont. And yet in Franklin County, Vermont, people are going, oh, well, yeah, that is so true. However, I will say, I do recall one time you making a terrific keynote address at the SOAR Learning Center at the graduation, which was very well regarded.
Yeah, my friend Dina actually asked me to come do that, and it was, oh man, wow, you just brought back some memories, because those are the kids that I love talking to all students, but I love the students that have some challenges, that have some real superpowers, I should say it that way, that are a little bit different than maybe just the mainstream. And
well, that was more than several years ago, and I remember it like it was yesterday, and it brought back a lot of memories when I knew we were going to be talking today about this subject.
Yeah.
And, So anyway, I think it's important that people do realize that locally you have made impressions on young people, and maybe more so than you may think. So we're going to have to wrap up. Boy, I could talk to you like all week. So where can viewers find this book if they'd like to buy it?
It's funny, I say this to kids all the time. I have something, some knick-knack or toy in my hand, and the kid's like, "Where did you get that?" And I'm like, "You ready for this? This magic place called the internet." So Amazon, you can get on Amazon. It's easy. But we did actually gave a stack to my friend at the Eloquent Page, Donna. If anybody wants them, I don't want a nickel for the books. I'll just give her a stack. If anybody wants to go give her a few dollars for the book, it would be great just to help her out for the holiday. So you can get it at the Eloquent Page. And yeah, it's a fun book. It's just super fun. I will tell you the style's a little different. I read before we finished it, I read the book Ishmael. And it's a dialogue. So a lot of the lessons are pushed through in dialogue. So it's kind of different. And as kids read it, now, because I've talked to a bunch of kids that have read it, and they love the writing style because it's not traditional.
Yeah. Well, it's awesome. Tom, it's been great to have you here this month. So I do want to thank my guest, Tom Murphy, for being on the show today and sharing his insights on ways to address hopelessness and his recent released book, 13 Pillows for Affective Teachers. I also want to thank you, the viewer, for spending time with us again this month. You can learn more about all of NCSS services and programs by logging on to ncssinc.org. I'm Joe Halco, and I'll be back next month with another episode of NCSS Here for You.